Go ahead, take a look in your kitchen pantry. You probably have a can of soup, maybe some beans or tuna in there, right? It seems, well, pretty ordinary. But what if I told you its story doesn't start in a grocery store, but on a battlefield, thanks to one of the most famous generals in history? See, on one side, you've got this crucial piece of military technology, something that literally fueled an empire. And on the other side, you got the beans for your chili night. It feels like these two things are from completely different planets. So how on earth did one become the other? Well, that is an absolutely incredible story of desperation, genius, and an invention that would completely change the way the world eats, forever. Let's set the scene. It's 1795. Napoleon Bonaparte is marching his massive armies all across Europe, but he's got a huge, huge problem. His soldiers are starving. Keeping food from spoiling on these long campaigns was next to impossible, and hunger and disease were killing as many of his men as the enemy was. Napoleon knew this was a weakness that could cost him everything. He needed a game changer. So, the French government put out this massive public challenge. Find a way to preserve food for the troops, and you'll get a very, very large cash prize. The race was officially on. And, the person who stepped up wasn't some famous scientist or an army engineer. Nope, he was a chef, a confectioner, actually. His name was Nicholas Appert, and he'd been tinkering with a pretty radical idea for years. Appert's method was, in hindsight, brilliantly simple. He'd put food into these thick glass jars, sealed them up super tight with cork and wax, and then boil them. Now here's the wild part. He had no idea why it worked. The science of bacteria, thanks to Louis Pasteur, was still decades away. But it did work. The food stayed fresh. So in 1809, he won the prize and went down in history as the father of canning. Okay, but there was one glaring problem. Appert's invention was genius, for sure, but glass jars? Can you just imagine trying to hand out heavy, fragile glass containers to soldiers marching into battle? It was a total logistical nightmare. The method was perfect, but the container? All wrong for war. This is where the story takes its next big leap. Just a year later, an Englishman named Peter Durand was paying attention. He looked at Appert's concept and thought, I can make that better. I can make that tougher. So Durand patented a new idea. Instead of fragile glass, he used a canister made of iron coated in tin. It was strong, it was much lighter, and you could knock it around without it shattering into a million pieces. It was basically built for life on the road. This was it, the birth of the tin can. So, problem solved, right? The military finally had its perfect food solution, a nearly indestructible container that kept food fresh for ages. It was a revolutionary piece of technology with one slightly dangerous and honestly pretty hilarious oversight. Yep, they invented the can, but they completely forgot to invent a way to get into the can. The can opener wouldn't show up for another 50 years. So what were you supposed to do when you were a hungry soldier? You used whatever you had. I'm not kidding. The official instructions were to use a bayonet and a hammer. If you didn't have those, well, you were told to just find a big rock and go to town. Dinner time was a genuinely hazardous event. So at this point, the can is basically a military and explorer's tool. The next chapter in this amazing story is how this battlefield invention made the jump from the front lines to factories and eventually right into our own homes. By the 1850s, factories started popping up, mass-producing cans for civilians, especially settlers heading west in America. Then, during World War I and World War II, canned food became the absolute lifeline for millions of soldiers in the trenches. And after the wars, that mass production came home. Brands we all know, like Campbell's and Heinz, made the can a fixture in every modern kitchen. And that brings us all the way to today. You might think the can is just old school tech, but believe me, it's still evolving and it's still showing up in some of the most advanced places imaginable. Today's cans are straight up engineering marvels. They're made of super lightweight and highly recyclable aluminum and steel. The technology inside locks in flavor and nutrients for an incredibly long time. And in this amazing full circle moment, canned food is still fueling explorers in the most extreme environments. It's a key part of the diet for astronauts aboard the International Space Station. So the next time you pick up a can opener, a little luxury those first soldiers would have loved, and you hear that satisfying pop, just pause for a second. You're not just opening a quick meal. You are literally opening a piece of history that connects you to Napoleon's army, the trenches of World War I,
and even the final frontier of outer space.
It really gets you thinking, doesn't it? What other everyday things are sitting in our houses, things we never give a second thought to, that have their own wild, globe spanning, incredible stories just waiting for us to discover?